Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So till now we have completed loops, conditional statements and recursion as well. We have performed some programs, we have tried some programs and tried to solve some problems based on factorial and also looping around the element of the arrays. We have traversed the complete array using the loops. We know the difference between loops, how to use them. Alright, so as we have discussed that today's concept will be strings. So let's get started with the strings. So what are strings? So first of all, you know int, you know float, you know char, you know boolean, correct? You know all this kind of data type. They were a kind of primitive data type. And I said that primitive data types are predefined. And you would have already noticed this by whenever you declare int, it gets highlighted. Otherwise your normal variable don't get highlighted like that. All right, so the things that are already defined are primitives, and other than that anything that is not defined or that is defined by us are non-primitive. But there was an exception in non-primitive data types. So the exception was string. So string is a predefined non-primitive data type. It is a class, we can create object of it. So we'll see how do we use string, what are the use of string, and how we can, what are the different kind of syntax for assigning or declaring a string. So string, yes, so it is a predefined non-primitive data type. So it is used for storing character sequence. The first point is, if someone asks you what is a string, it is a kind of non-primitive data type which can be used for storing character sequence. What do you mean by character? Char was used for storing a character, correct? So a single character like a, b, capital A, 0, at the rate, percentage, numbers, but a single character. But now what if you don't want to store a single character, you want to store a complete sentence or a complete word or a paragraph? Is there any alternative for this? So yes, there is string which we can use for storing a character sequence. So for example, I want to store Arun. Which data type can I use? I cannot store it in int, I cannot store it in float, not even in long, not even in char, not in boolean. So we can use string for storing words or sentences, or I can say that, to be precise, a character sequence, and this sequence can be n number of characters, and the even space is a character, correct? So yes, I hope it is clear till now that why strings can be used or how strings can be used. So what is the need of you strings? Now we'll see what are the ways of declaring a string. So we have already discussed, or we have already practiced this way, like a is equals to some value, let's say Arun, and the other way is by using a new keyword. Okay, and we'll see that what is the difference between them. All right, yes, so now the whole thing about string, why strings are unique, is because of its memory allocation. And one thing you need to notice, strings are immutable in Java. What do I mean by immutable? What do you mean by mutate? Mutate means change, vary. And what do you mean by immutable? Which means it cannot be changed, correct? It cannot be altered. So which means if I declare a string as by some value, it cannot be altered. You would have, like, you would be making this kind of assumptions, correct? Yes, it is a kind of true assumptions, but let's see how actually strings are immutable and how do we reinitialize a variable. So for now you know that strings are immutable, but don't know what do I mean by that. You just know the meaning of word immutable. No worries about that. So if I say string s is equals to Arun, and then if I say system.out.println, this is how we started learning different data types as well. We started declaring variables and we tried to print them out. Can I reinitialize it to Rohan? Let me just use a semicolon. Yes, but now can you see Rohan is coming out over here. Now you will say that, hey Rohan, you have said that string is immutable, it can be changed. Then how Arun is getting changed with Rohan? We'll understand how this thing happens behind the scenes, how the memory allocation takes place for the strings. So for now, you know that string can be used for storing a character sequence, and it is one of the most used data type in Java, and you can see that it is very important as well, because there is no such data type for holding a email as well, or for holding name, first name, and it is a need for storing such kind of data, so we can use strings for that. All right, so now let's proceed with how things actually work. Right, so let's say this is a memory. In a memory we have a heap space, correct, where objects are created, or I can say where all the non-primitives are stored. Am I right? Yes, so strings so are a kind of object, so it is obvious the string are the one that is going to get stored inside the heap memory, correct? Yes, so now there is a special memory for strings that is called as string constant pool, or it is often called as SCP. So don't get confused with this word, that what is string constant pool and what is SCP. It is same. Yes, so now what happens whenever you declare a variable s, it is of type string, correct? So whenever you declare a variable s, what happens, it looks whether this value is present in the SCP or not. So is there any Rohan over here? If not, it will create two copy of it, one in heap and one in the SCP. Now when other string variable s2, let's say s2 again have the same value Rohan, okay, so now what happens, it will again check in the SCP, is there any Rohan value over here? Yes, it is there, so it won't create in the heap memory, it will just point to this value. So now what happens, whenever I call s returns the value of Rohan, and s2 as well returns the value of this Rohan only. For this there is no independent copy, because Rohan was already present in the SCP, then it used that, correct? So now you can see that if I change the value for s, if I change the value for s, so let's say if I change it to Arun, what happened, if this thing would have overwritten like Arun and Arun, what would have happened, s2's value will be lost, correct, because it will be like, it will be pointing to Arun. So that's the reason why it has been said that strings are immutable. So now the question is that how does the Arun gets stored for s, am I right? So the answer to this is another variable or another value. Let me just explain it again. Yes. So let's say this is a memory, our heap space, and inside the heap we have SCP, that is a string constant pool. Am I right? Yes. So now let's say we have two variables S and S2. So we have discussed about two ways of declaring strings. The first one was the normal way like we did previously. So let's say Rohan and then Rohan again. Correct. Now for the first time, or I can say that if you use this way, it will always check in the SCP. So now what happens? It is checking that whether Rohan is present in the SCP or not. Is it present? No, Rohan is not there. So what it will do? It will create one Rohan over here and one Rohan over here. Am I right? Now for the next time, S2 is trying to declare a variable, or S2 is getting declared and it is trying to initialize itself as Rohan. So is there any Rohan inside the SCP? If yes, you have to point to this Rohan. You don't have to create independent, or you don't have create another copy of Rohan in SCP and heap, because there is already a Rohan, so you use that copy. All right. So now if I do this and you print S, you will get the output as Arun. But can you imagine that if this gets changed to Arun, what would have happened? S2's value is lost. If I try to print S2 now, it will return Arun, but it should not happen, correct? So that's the reason why strings are made immutable. Now the question is how it prints Arun. So as soon as you try to initialize, a string variable, again what happens? It creates a new object of it. So Rohan is still there, but Arun is created again. All right. So now Arun is there. Am I right? Our memory, correct? This is our memory, our heap space, and our SCP. As soon as I tried to create it in this fashion, the normal way, without using any new string way, this is our first syntax that we are learning. Is it still buffering for you all? If yes, please let me know. So now what happens? It is the normal way of declaring a string. So it will check whether Arun is present in the SCP. No, it is not present. So you have to create one, and even you have to create in heap. Great, I am done. Now you have to reinitialize S with Arun. So S is pointing to Arun now. Correct. Now you have to reinitialize it with Rohan. Correct. So now what happens? It won't override this. Instead, it will create a new object of Rohan. So whenever you try to reinitialize, it will internally create a new object. Am I right? So now S is pointing toward this Rohan. Am I right? So now if I try to print S, yes, S is pointing to Rohan and it will print S, but Arun didn't got deleted yet. Am I right? Yes. So now, yes. All right. Now let me, yes. So now if there is another variable, now you don't have to worry about this line. And before moving like this, I'll just have another example with this. So now what happens? Again, the SCP heap, Arun is there? No. Create Arun. Arun is there? Yes, Arun is there. Just point to it. Do not create a new copy for it. But now the next syntax of declaring a string says that, let us understand that syntax as well, then we'll explore that. So new string and the value of string. So now let me have the same value. Now the first syntax, what is the criteria for creating this s variable? It will first look inside the scp. Am I right? So it will check in the scp, and if it is not found, it will create in the scp as well, in the heap as well. But now if you use a new keyword, what happens? It won't check in the scp irrespective of whether Arun is present in the scp or not. It will create a new Arun over here and even over here. So now they are not sharing the same memory address, correct? Previously, if I didn't use this syntax, then what happened? It was pointing to the same memory address. Am I right? Yes. So now this makes a clear idea that whenever you create a new object or create a string using a new keyword, it irrespective of the scp creates a new object for that or creates a new copy for that particular value. Whether it is present in the scp or not, that doesn't matter. Am I right? Yes. So now even reinitializing s equals to, now let's say Rohan. Am I right? So now what happens behind the scenes? It is creating a new object. So how objects are created? Using the new keyword only. So behind the scenes it is creating a new object, and Rohan is created everywhere, means both in scp and in the heap. Let there be Rohan already there, but then too it is creating a new object. It will create forcefully irrespective of whether it is there or not. So I hope the scp concept is clear till now. Now your question will be, why there is a need of scp? And again the another question will be, why strings are immutable and why scp? Correct? These are the questions, and it's fine to have this question for now. So now it's time to get rid of this question. Let's try to find out the answer for that. scp comes into the picture for saving the memory. The first thing, saves the memory usage. Because see, most of the time string is one of the most used data type, so it will be useful if I have something to save memories, correct? So now what happens over here, Arun, how it saves memory? Arun is present or not? If not, create Arun. Now let's say I have s1 equals to Arun. I am trying to declare string s1 equals to Arun and string s2 equals to Arun, string s3 equals to Arun. How many copies of Arun will be there? If you can give the answer to this in the chat box, which means you have clearly understood the concept. I am not using any new keyword over here, am I? No. So if you can give the answer to this, which means you have completed the 50% of the concept till now. So try to pause the video and try to give the answer for this. How many copy of Arun will be there in the heap and in the scp? Okay. Yes. So now let us understand the concept again. Yes. Arun got created once. Now for the second time, when I create s1, what happens? When I create s1, what is the value of s1? S1 is Arun. So how it will do? There is no new keyword. So we have to check in the scp, correct? Whether Arun is present in the scp or not. Yes, it is there. So now s1 is pointing to the same memory address where s is pointing. Am I right? Yes. Where s2 will be pointing, it will create. Yes, so it will create Arun in the, it will check whether Arun is there in the scp or not. If it is there, just point to it. Now S3 the same way, point to it. So how many copies of Arun? One copy in heap, one copy in SCP. Great. No, even heap will have the one copy, because heap will have the new copy if there is no SCP, or if there is no copy in the SCP, correct? If there was no Arun, then only SCP and heap comes into the picture together. Am I right? Or if I am using a new keyword, correct? Yes. So now I saved memory for 3 variables, and like this there can be hundreds of variables. So I am saving memory somehow. But now what if, now this question is clear that SCP comes into the picture for saving the memory. Now the question is this: why strings are immutable? So the reason for this is, now let's say S2 later after some time wants to change his name. He wants to change his name to John. So how I do? S2 is equals to John. So now if strings were immutable, now let's assume that strings are immutable. Okay, so now if they are immutable, this this Arun would have overwritten by John, and even this Arun would have overwritten by John. Now if I try to print the name of S3, S1 and S2, what will be the output? It will be John, 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 John for all of them. But it is not the correct output, because John should be only available, John value should be only available for S2. So that's the reason why strings are immutable. But you can reinitialize a string, but as soon as you try to reinitialize a string, a new object of that string is created. So now this S2 will be pointing to this memory address, not to this, but over here we still have Arun, correct? So this is how strings are immutable, this is how strings achieve immutability, and this is the reason why SCP is useful in saving the memories. Yes, now I hope SCP and immutability is clear to all of you. Now again let me emphasize on the new keyword, because it might be not clear to you all at this moment of time. All right, so let me declare, you can just keep this. Yes, let me declare a new variable, string S2 is equals to new Arun. What happens? S, no Arun over here, create one, no Arun over here, create one. S2, irrespective of whether Arun is there or not. All right, I've just saved. Irrespective of whether Arun is there or not, what it will do, because I am using a new keyword, I don't have to check in the SCP, I want to forcefully create it, whether it is there or not, I don't want to check that. So it will create Arun and Arun, correct? So now S2 is pointing to this memory address and S is pointing to this memory address, correct? So if I say yes, now I hope it is clear to everyone that how S and means this syntax, the first syntax, and this syntax, the second one using the new keyword, works. Now let's come to a very popular interview question, that is the difference between equal to and dot equals, or I can say and equals, correct? So now what happens over here, if you use equal to with any object or with strings to be precise, if you use equal to, it will check the memory address. Okay, it won't check the values, it will check the memory address. If they are sharing the same memory address, then only it will return true, otherwise it will return false. And equals method will give us the comparison between the value. So don't worry about this equals, first our goal is to learn about the equal to operator. So let's learn this. As you all know that equal to will be comparing the memory address. All right, so now let me again keep, this is our SCP, don't worry about this line. S2 is equals to Arun, S3 is equals to new string Arun. Now can you tell me how this will work? So if I say you have to declare a variable S by using this syntax, no new keyword, you have to check in the SCP. Is there Arun in SCP? No. Create one in heap and one in SCP. Great, I'm done. Create a variable S2 using the normal syntax and the value is Arun. So is the value Arun in the SCP? Yes. So do not create one, just point to this. S is pointing to this, S2 is still pointing to this. S3, I have to create a variable S3 using a new keyword. So will it check in the SCP? The answer to this is no, a big no, correct? Because irrespective of whether it is there or not, it will always create one. Am I right? Yes. Clear till now? So now if I say S equals to S2, what will happen? It will compare what? The memory address. So is S and S2 sharing the same memory address? The answer to this is yes, because they are pointing to the same memory address. So this will return true, correct? But is S and S3, if I say S equals to S3, are they sharing the same memory address? No, because S is pointing over here and S3 is pointing over here. So that is the reason why when we have equal to with a new string object, we always get a false answer, correct? Now if I say S2 equals to S3, will it give false or true? Let's see. S2 is pointing to this location and S3 is pointing to this location. We'll get again false. So I hope it is clear that if you use a new keyword, we are definitely going to get the false answer if I use the equal to operator. Clear? Yes. So now the question is, how can I check the value? I don't want to check the memory address. That's none of my business. I want to check the value. I want to compare the string based on the values. So to perform this, so to do this, so let's say yes. So now over here equals to compares the memory address and equals method compares the value. Now just keep these points in mind and you will definitely clear your interviews. Just these two points. All right. So now what happens if I say, let me have a small representation of this thing. Arun, S points over here, right? Sorry, S2 again points over here. S3 has its own Arun, irrespective whether it is there or not. So if I do S equals to S2, I'm just revising things. What will happen? Equal to checks the memory address. So we'll get true for this because S and S2 are sharing the same memory address over here, correct? So we'll get true, but S2 and S3 are not sharing the same memory address. S2 is pointing over here, S3 is pointing over here, so we'll get false. And same for the S and S3, S over points over here and S3 points over here, so we'll get false. Now the question was, how can I check the values? So for checking the values, for comparing the values, you can use the s dot equals method. So in the string class, we have a equals method that helps us, or that provides us the functionality of comparing two strings based on their values. So now it will check the values. So now it will check, is Arun equals to Arun? Yes, it is equal, correct? So it will give us true. Now it will check. Now let's say s2 dot equals s3, what will be the output? The output will be true again, because now we are not checking the memory address, we are checking the value, we are retrieving the value for that particular variable. So for s2 it comes out to be Arun, for s3 it comes out to be Arun, and now I am comparing these two values. So yes, it is equal, the values are equal, so that's the reason why we get true. Now if I say this, again we have true, because it is also having the Arun value and s3 is having the Arun value. All right, so I hope it is clear to every one of you. Am I right? Yes. So now the question, your questions, you are asking the valid question, that why we are having the values in the heap. See, heap memory is the one that we use to refer, correct? We are referring, or all the objects are stored inside the heap. Am I right? And even string, when we declare a string, it is an object, correct? So let's say this is our heap memory, or to be precise, let me declare a stack memory as well. So in stack we have our pointing variables, correct? But you know that, see, now let me explain the actual representation for this, because if I would have done this at the very start, then it will be very confusing for you all. Now you have a better understanding that how string compares the SCP, why strings are immutable, and how we can compare the values. We can use the equal to method, equals method. Equal to is for comparing the memory address, and we'll see that in action. Do not worry about this. So SCP is just for checking whether the variable, whether the value is present over there or not. The thing that we need is the heap. Am I right? We store our data in heap, we retrieve our data from our heap. So let's say in a stack memory, this is our complete memory, let's say including the heap. So in a memory we have stack memory and the heap memory. So our variables, we already know that they are in the stack memory. Now see, this thing S, let's say, points over here, Arun, but now first it checks in the SCP. If it is not there, Arun will be stored over here and it will be stored over here, correct? So this points like this. All right, now S2, as soon as I declare S2 equals to Arun, it will check in the SCP whether it is there or not. If it is there, it will point to this location, and now indirectly it is pointing to the memory location over here, because SCP is still a part of heap. It can directly point to this memory address of that particular heap memory. Alright, so Arun is pointing to heap, so indirectly they are having the same memory address, and the address that matters is of heap. We always store our object on the heap directly. SCP is just for comparing the values, or I can say that for saving the memory consumption. It is just redirecting or rerouting us to the heap memory only. So if I am having a new variable using a new keyword, it is like this only, but we are retrieving the data from here only. But if somehow, like if I say S4 equals to Arun again, what will happen? It will point, it will check in the SCP. If it is there, it will point over there, or we can say that behind the scene it points to this memory location only. So I hope it is clear now. Yes, great. So now it is clear to you all that how the thing works behind the scene. So now we know the concept of SCP, how it can be, means how string uses SCP, and when it is checked. If I am having any, if I declare a string using a new keyword, irrespective of whether the value is present over here or not, it will create a new one over here, correct? And in the heap as well. So yes, we know that how SCP helps us to save the memory, why strings are immutable in Java, and we know what do you mean by immutability. We can reinitialize a string, but the value, the previous value is still over there, and the new reinitialized string will always create a new object. So now let us practice this. Let me say that string s1 equals to Arun, correct? Now if I try to do s equals to s1, can you see the output comes out to be true, because s1 got the value in the SCP and it compares the memory address because it is pointing to the same memory address. All right, and now if I use the new keyword, what will happen? It will give us false. So now you are asking that please explain how s equals to s2 or s1 gives us false over here or gives us true over here, how it is checked, correct? So now let me explain this thing again. It will check Arun, is it there in SCP? No. Create one copy over here, one copy over here. Now see, whenever I want to retrieve the memory address, this is just for checking. The actual stuff is over here. Whenever I want to retrieve data, it will come over, it will be coming from here. Whenever I want to check the memory address, it will be coming from here. Whenever I want to compare it, it will be coming from here, correct? The SCP comes into the picture just for saving the memory, so that it saves the memory just by comparing the values. That's it. It don't have any other significance like that. So now let's say I have s2 is equals to Arun. What will happen? It will check in the SCP. All right, s2 points over here. But what I said, values, address, and everything will be retrieved from over here only. So now your question will be how it gets redirected to here. So you know that this value has the reference to this. So this can redirect it towards it. Correct. So if I check s equals to s2, now what will happen behind the scene? It will check, hey, what is the memory address of s? All right, s is pointing over here. What is the memory address of s2? The thing we are interested in the heap, not the SCP, correct? Because always objects are stored, retrieved from the heap only. So now s2's heap address is the same. We don't have any s2's other heap address. We don't have any other Arun value for s2, correct? But now when s1 comes into the picture, it says that I am having a new keyword. I will declare it my own Arun, and now this is pointing over here. So I hope it's clear to everyone that how this thing get compared. Clear to all? Do you have any doubts? Yes. So now let us declare few more variables, or let me make it as 1 and this as 2. Now you tell me, if I do s equals to s2, what will be the output? Type it in the chat box. And if I do s equals to s1, what will be the output? And if I say system.out.println s dot equals s1, and if I say system.out.println s dot equals s2. Now can you give me the output for this? Equals to, or I can say equal always checks the memory location. So scp heap s Arun s1 points to the same memory location where s is pointing. So if I do s equals to s1, will it give the same output? Definitely yes. So it will give us the same memory address. That's the reason why we'll be getting true. If I say s dot equals s1, so it will retrieve the value for s. What is the value for s? Arun. What is the value for s1? Arun. Are both the values same? Definitely yes. So at this time as well, we are going to get the output as true. Over here, s and s2. As soon as I declare s2, it has its own copy. Correct? So s equals to s2. Check the memory address. So s is pointing over here and s2 is pointing over here. So are they same? No. So we'll get false. But over here, if I say dot equals, it will say alright, I have to retrieve the value for s. The value for s is Arun. For s2, it is still Arun. Is it the same values? Yes. Then we'll get the true. So can you tell me the output? True, true, false and true. Correct? So let's try to execute this. And can you see? The output is true, true, false and true. Correct? So this is how thing works behind the scenes. So now if I try to initialize s equals to Rohan, or yes, first let's try this. Now you know that even see over here memory address got changed because SCP Arun was there for s. Now I change s1 was pointing to the same memory address and s2 was having its own Arun. But now after that I tried to change, or I can say that I am running my program, then that's fine. Or let me make it bit obvious. After this, s is equals to Rohan. Yes. So now we are over here, s and s2 are pointing to the same memory location and s2 is pointing over here. So s and s1 are over here pointing over here and s2 is pointing over here. Now I want to change the value of s to Rohan. Now see what happens. I'm trying to reinitialize. If I'm trying to reinitialize, will it check in the SCP? Never. It will always create a new object. So just keep this thing in mind. This might come in the MCQs and you might hit the wrong option. So now it will create Rohan irrespective whether it is there in the SCP or not. Now s is pointing over here. So now if I say s equals to s1, are they both pointing to the same memory location? No. So we'll get false. Now if I do s dot equal, what is the value of s? Arun. What is the value of s1? Rohan. Are they equal? Again no, we get false. If I say s and s2, are they pointing to the same memory location? False. S dot equals s2. So Rohan and Arun, are they sharing the same memory address? Oh sorry, sharing the same value? No. So we get false in all the 4 cases. Correct? And this is what we discussed now. Great. So now you all are understanding the things, how things are getting stored. So if you try to mutate, or if you try to initialize, or if you try to alter your string, irrespective of the SCP, it will create a new object. Correct? So just keep this thing in mind whenever you try to mutate it. All right. Now if you try to do this, Yes. If you do string s plus Arun, Arun, Arun. All right. So there is a method in string called as concat, which joins two string. Tomorrow we'll be seeing many predefined methods that we have in over here, that we have in strings. Do not worry about this. So now, just a second, if I say system.out.println, modify, sorry, I'm not reinitializing it. If I want to reinitialize, I use equal to sign, and if I try to reinitialize like this, it will create a new object. But over here I am not reinitializing it, and if I don't try to reinitialize, it won't create a new object. And if it is not creating a new object, which means we are not never going to change our SCP value for Arun and heap value for Arun, because strings are immutable. So it is not getting changed to Arun, Arun and Arun, because we are not reinitializing it. If I have done this, it would have created a new object like Arun, Arun and Arun in both SCP and over here as well, in the heap as well. But now I am not reinitializing it. We are trying to just modify my previous string. I am trying to modify this, and is it possible? No. So that's the reason why it is not getting altered. So yes, do not worry about these methods. Tomorrow we'll be having an exercise, like we'll be having ton of programs using some methods, and we'll be learning new methods as well, like equals, replace and split. So do not worry about this. Today's session was just for emphasizing that how strings are unique in Java. Now you know that what are the concept of string, and yes, it is a good concept, but then too you need to pay attention to it, otherwise you will get confused. But now once you pay attention to it, then it is quite easy. Am I right? Yes. So our next session will be on Monday. Yes. All right. So if you have any doubts till now, do you have any doubts? Do ask me now, because if you can clear your doubt for string today itself, then you have 2 days for practicing it. You practice and try to break as many as thing you can in this strings values. You try. I'm not discussing each and every scenarios. I'm keep giving the things up to you, because if you don't practice, then you won't learn. And on Monday you are going to ask me a lot of questions, if not, which means that you have not practiced. So you should practice a lot. Try to break, try to make Arun, try to change it. Now try to create a variable like s2 and try to initialize it with Rohan. Check whether s2 and s is now equal or not. I could have done this over here, correct? But you try these all questions and then ask me on Monday if you have any doubts. But before asking me the doubts, you should again create your own visual representation about SCPs. Whenever new objects are created, you just keep that in mind. Whenever you reinitialize S, a new object is created behind the scene. So irrespective of whether it is there or not, it will be a new object. So practice as much as you can, because strings, for strings there are a lot of problems, and you can Google it as well. We'll learn some problems like palindrome streams. Do not worry about that. So for now, it is quite enough for today's session, and sorry for the inconvenience that because of the network issue between the session. All right, so if you have any doubts now, ask me now itself, and we'll meet on Monday at the same time, that is 7:30 evening. All right. Yes. So do you have any doubts, or shall I stop the stream for now? Yes. And even if you have any doubts on Saturdays or Sundays, you can just ask me. If you are not commenting in the comment section, no worries, you can ask me in the Telegram group, and the link for the group is in the description, so you can join the group. All right, so you can ask your doubts whenever you get the doubts. You don't have to wait for the next lecture. You can ask in the midnights as well. If we are available, we'll be helping you at that time as well. All right, so we'll meet on Monday at the same time. Till then, practice a lot and happy learning. See you all on Monday. Thank you everyone for joining today's session.